Beth.
Hello friends, this is Event AV and Lighting Demystified, brought to you by Trifan Events, and I'm your host Anca. Welcome to our new episode this month. How's everybody doing with everything that's been happening in the last couple of weeks? I feel like because I'm airing an episode like every month, there's always something that's happened in the month prior. This year, man, what a roller coaster ride, right? I'm just going to leave it at that and just segue into our topic for today's episode, which I'm guessing you already have a feeling that it's related to. Wanna give it a wild guess anyway? That's right, virtual events. And so that I'm not here rambling to myself, I have invited a special guest with me today. Her name is Beth Sandefur, and she's been just on fire in the fundraising virtual event arena, planning and producing several dozen events so far. Beth is a seasoned event planner with a strong background in development and hands-on experience with theatrical production. Her efforts focus on planning and execution of fundraising galas, typically with a large auction component. As a planner, she believes in working with clients to find the inefficiencies and redundancies in their systems to create a streamlined approach, keeping the organizational mission in the forefront while still throwing a great party. She's also working as a consultant to help clients integrate their annual fundraising event into year-round donor development through auction data collection, analysis, as well as creating comprehensive sponsorship proposal strategies. She has built from the ground up transcontinental Nobel Prize celebrations, multi-million-dollar gala fundraisers, ribbon cuttings, and every other manner of extraordinary event. She speaks production tech, my favorite. She speaks database and decor with equal passion, facilitating the creation of uniquely dramatic events without all the drama. It is my pleasure to invite Beth on the air with me and have a candid conversation about emerging practices and trends that we are seeing and have seen so far coming out of the virtual events world with a focus on fundraising and gala virtual events. Beth is going to share her hard-learned tips and tricks, and we'll even cover ways to stay sane when you're in the whirlwind of virtual event planning and producing. We've shared a few laughs as we recorded this episode, several Me Too moments, and a few aha moments as well. So I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if so, feel free to leave us some feedback either on social media at trifan_events or via email podcast@trifanevents.com. Beth, welcome to the show. I am so glad that we are able to have you on. How are you doing these days? Or should I ask, how are you still alive? Because just a wild guess, you're probably currently in the swing of fall virtual fundraising events. And if you're like me, you've got back-to-back upcoming events juggling all at once.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here and chat with you today. And yes, I am definitely in the thick of the fall event season. I think I have at least 3 events every week between now and Thanksgiving. So it's pretty fast and furious right now.
I bet we will have to get to how you keep sane during this time. Later in our show, we will touch on that. Right now, I would like to dig into the making of a successful virtual event. And you're an industry leader and you come with such heavy event management and online bidding support. And I want our listeners to learn as much as they can from your experience and your expertise. And before we jump into, virtual event programming and all the other elements, content, platforms, budgeting tips, and revenue opportunities, all that good stuff. Let me ask you, in your opinion, right now in the age of COVID-19, what skills, knowledge, or maybe even personality traits do you think a event planner must possess?
Wow, that's a great question. I feel like my job has really shifted from, traditional event management and much more into TV production, which is, similar, but also very different in some ways.
Yeah.
Scripting is different. The way that you approach design for all of your collateral is different. I mean, there are a lot of things that we do in-person events that just don't translate well to a virtual event. And so I feel like the events that are being the most successful are the ones that are not trying to recreate their in-person event online. They're saying, how can we create the best television show possible that showcases our event, that puts our cause in the forefront? Like, how do we make that super dynamic and engaging? It's very much TV production and not event management at this point.
I couldn't agree more. So, with that in mind, when you think back on your most successful virtual event this year, right? And it feels like we've been doing virtual events forever, but really it's just started in March. What would you say are some of the factors that contributed to that event success?
Wow. I think really good scripting for the event. I mean, I think having a good concept, right? Like, having a vision of what the event is going to be, how everything's going to come together. I think that there is still a lot of opportunity to theme out an event. I have an event that's actually coming up tonight for an arts company that they're going to be debuting a graphic novel opera. So it's like opera set to comic book style types of illustrations where they actually did motion capture with the artists and then created illustrations out of their faces. And we've taken that whole comic book theme and built the entire event around it. So when we go from our intro loop of opening slides into the main program, we're going to stop and do a logo reveal that's like a Marvel comic style illustrations from the graphic novel opera behind their logo, and it flashes on screen. And then we're carrying that whole comic book feel throughout the event. So it's still going to feel different and unique to who they are and speaks to what they're doing, because it's going to tie directly to the work that they're going to see later in the event. And I'm really excited about that they've embraced this medium of saying, yes, we're an arts organization, or they're an opera company, and generally we would be producing things on stage, but that's not where we are right now. So how can we take our art form and make it into something that is more suitable for TV, for screen? And being able to build their whole fundraising event around that theme is something that's been really exciting to work on. I'm very anxious to see it all unfold tonight in real time.
I am just loving this because I mean, it's just taking creativity and applying it, like you said, to a event that now is not just an in-person where you have so many options and opportunities to express that creativity, but now you have to make it in a way that the audience on the other side of the screen perceives it and engages with it. So I'm loving it. I need to get that link and watch it. I'm like, who takes some notes, girl?
I'll send it to you. Yeah, it's pretty great. But I just love that, again, that they've just really embraced, they haven't lost sight of who they are. And I think that there's sometimes, I don't know, people kind of default to oh, well, we can't do fun things because we're not in person. And so we're just going to have somebody on screen talk a little bit about the organization, and maybe we'll do an auction, and we'll just try to get it done in 45 minutes, and we'll be out. And it ends up just a bunch of talking heads, which it's important if you're a nonprofit organization to get your message out there. That's the most important thing,
Yeah.
getting your message out. But you can still do it in fun ways. You can find the ways to make it be fun and still be authentic to who you are, and speak to your cause.
Absolutely. And I'm honestly getting a little tired of all those events that follow the same template. And I'm like, how can we bring the fun level up a little bit? And it
Right.
was fun to actually see. Last night, we had an event that was produced actually by Swim Strategies in our studios. And they had this element of a live bingo. And I was like, I want to play that. And I have no business playing bingo because I'm like, I have no idea how to.
Well, I mean, you and I did an event, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, where we had, our client did those trivia slides in there. So part of their opening loop right before the main program began is that we had 10 trivia questions. And for them, it was an anniversary year. So some of it was about, well, what was happening in the year that we were founded. And then there were things about the organization about, well, how many students do we impact in a year? And it was just very simple, a 30-second slide with a question and then a 30-second slide with an answer. But it was fun. I mean, it was a way that people can engage and talk in the chat to answer questions and kind of get going. And I was talking about that with another client, and now I'm replicating that, tweak it a little bit, but a different version for another client. And again, it's like there's just so many opportunities out there that like if you can get out of the Zoom box a little bit, and think about like, well, how are ways that we can still, bring something in that's creative. And again, I love with a nonprofit if everything can always still come back to the mission in some way.
Absolutely.
I think that's a nice way to sort of loop it all together.
I couldn't agree more. And yes, I do remember our event with Tree. I don't know why it escaped my mind. Okay, maybe because we had like 50 since then. And
Right?
wasn't that just not last week, but maybe last month?
Like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I cannot keep track. It wasn't that long, but at this point, it's like, I don't even know what date is.
Yeah, they're all kind of a blur at this point.
Kind of a blur, exactly. Yeah, I love those ideas and creative ways to incorporate into an event and still, manage somewhat, because we all know how virtual events have a little bit of a lag when it comes to what you deliver versus what the audience receives and when do they receive it. So the challenge is still that, but making it possible through just creativity and ways in which you can incorporate some of those elements. I mean, I'm all for that. And I'm so excited to just be seeing a lot of events that are starting to, step outside of the box a little bit, because now we've been doing events for a few months and it's been like, okay, this works. This was great. Now, what can we do to enhance that experience a bit more? And especially for nonprofits, for virtual events that are not conferences that usually already have a pretty beefed up platform. So for them, this is their opportunity, 1 hour that night, that day, to raise some funds, but make it in a way that draws an audience and engages the audience.
Right.
So let me ask you another question here, which goes more into, the flow of how you operate, because I'm always interested in different ways how people do their events. And say you just got a call, you got an email, and a new virtual event just landed on your desk. What happens from here? What is your flow? What are the steps that you follow? And you can go into details, or you can just like pretty much give it like, okay, here's what happens, just so that somebody that listens and like, oh, I think I do need an event producer. Oh, I think I do need an event consultant.
Yeah, so I work with clients in a couple of ways. I mean, you mentioned earlier, I do a lot of online bidding software support. So I have my services structured in that you can either hire me to be your show producer, AKA your event manager, right? Formerly known as, sort of fill that role, or I can be just the person that's implementing your online bidding software. I work primarily with Greater Giving, but I also Give Smart and Give Lively, the 2 other ones that I work with. So sometimes it's just the software part of it, or you could hire me to do both. So for me, like the biggest first step is like just figuring out the scope of work of like, what is your vision for your event? Where are your needs? How do I fit into that? And kind of figuring out that puzzle. And then once I'm hired, most clients that I work with hire me for the comprehensive package where I'm kind of doing everything. And so then it would be my first thing that I like to do is just to figure out the timeline. I typically work backwards and say, okay, if your event day is this day, and I know I'm going to want to do a rehearsal 2 or 3 days before that, which means I would need to have all my scripts and video and everything in, done 3 or 4 days before that, and just start backing out and try to list all of the tasks that need to be accomplished. And at this point, I mean, I have kind of a template. It's easy for me to come up with this, but everything's sort of date dependent and organized. Like, okay, these are all the things that need to be done for the auction and when those deadlines need to be hit for everything to go according to plan. And this is all the video creation that would need to be done or scripts that need to be written, and just like all those tasks, establish those key deadlines. And again, I've got templates. I've got like a 30, 60, 90 day, sort of template. I mean, it's great. Like it's October and I'm already talking to people about April events. Like that's great. But I also have people, it's October, that are asking me about December events.
Exactly.
So sometimes those timelines get compressed, but I think you still have to like figure out like, what is the timeline? When are those key deadlines? Because that's then your roadmap. And that becomes my roadmap for meetings. I like to have weekly meetings with my clients. I've got a client right now that I'm actually meeting with a couple of times a week because they just need a little bit more hand holding, but that becomes my roadmap for how are we getting from start to final product on event day. And then there's usually a couple of other documents that I put together. One, I call it an asset tracking sheet. So assets meaning all of the video, logo files, style guide, all of the creative elements that we will need so that we can track like who's responsible for coming up with certain things, what is the status of those. And then I will also immediately share a run of show template so that even if we're just sketching out in very broad strokes, like, well, this is what the flow of the program is going to be. And then all of those documents are like living, working documents that we refine as we go along. Certain details fall off or we have to add things. But those are the three main documents that are like my must-haves for every event that help me get started.
Absolutely. I love that. Now, I know that a lot of people are not yet comfortable with what does that actually entail, or they're feeling so nervous because in the past that wasn't necessarily on such a tight deadline, or it was something that was taken care of by some third-party production company that it would be done months in advance. And now I run into the same challenge where a lot of the clients, now that they realize they need this content as part of their program flow, because I mean, you can just show up in front of the camera, talk for 5 minutes, and then, start asking for money. I mean, you could. How successful that approach might be, that's a different question. How do you use what you've got, the content you've got, the assets you've got, to tell a story about your organization, about the reasons for raising the funds? And if somebody just landed on your live stream and they haven't heard anything about you, will there be enough information to tell your story in a way that compels them to open up their wallet?
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up. I mean, there's a couple of things I want to say. I mean, I think one, the volume of video production, I think, has changed in this virtual world. Before, maybe there's a video that was produced that goes with your fund to need or your special appeal, but everything else was handled by, someone standing behind a podium and speaking on a stage. And now all of a sudden we're getting the video that goes before the special appeal and the CEO's welcome remarks and the board president. And it's like all these other remarks that typically would have been live are now getting pre-recorded. So it is a much bigger volume, I think, of video production. Yeah. But the thing I feel like hasn't changed, at least in the way that I've always approached events, and this part of comes from because I have a theater background and, learned how to do events very much in a theater sort of way, of creating a narrative arc for your event, right? Yeah. Like figuring out what is the story that you are wanting to tell about your organization, like what is the narrative for the event, so that people understand what's going to be expected of them, why their support is important, exactly. Like what's happening, all of that. And a lot of that, like you should have been doing that in your in-person event too. Like now it's just changed, the medium has changed, yes. But all that messaging hasn't changed. But you're exactly right. I mean, I used to work for a regional theater here in Northern California, and we did Shakespeare and the classics. And we moved our event into downtown San Francisco one year because we had outgrown our venue in the East Bay, and all of a sudden we're in San Francisco. And because of who the artistic director was at the event, we had a lot of like society folks coming to the event and would write checks at the gala that had never once stepped foot on the grounds at the theater. And it was this big, beautiful amphitheater, and it was surrounded by eucalyptus groves, and like there's cows on the hill behind I mean, it was amazing. But we had all these people coming to the gala that just had no idea anything that was happening there. So we did things like starting to bring in, mannequins with costumes from the productions, and that became part of the decor in the reception at the gala. And like we started thinking about like how are the ways that weave in what we do and who we are into the theme and the decor for the evening. And I think that kind of methodology still applies in virtual. I love a good theme. I'm super stoked about this comic book thing that I'm doing with the opera company tonight, but it's not a theme for the sake of having a theme. It ties back to what they're doing. I think that's important to think about. Like, yes, be creative, have fun, do all that, but always think about how are you telling your story through that.
Exactly. And how does that work with your specific organization, the purpose, the vision, and all of that? I mean, you could go on Pinterest and find teams, event teams. Will that be the best apply method to your organization? I mean, obviously, you're going to have to ask that question yourself.
Right.
So this is perfect time to actually segue into the elements of a virtual event. And if you want to talk a little bit about that, kind of outline, what exactly is this program flow and how is it different than an in-person event?
Yeah. So again, I work primarily with nonprofits on fundraising events. So I feel like a lot of my big conversations initially when we're talking about program flows start centering around, is there going to be a live auction? If so, how are we conducting that? How many auction items are in the auction? Are we selling these items one by one? Are we selling things in groups? Because that has a huge effect on the timing. And then also, are you doing a special appeal or a fund to need? If you're doing both of those things and it's a fundraising event, like that needs to be sort of your prime time content. And we need to spend a lot of time there. And then you fill in around it, But I mean, I have some clients that in a live event would do 40 live auction items. That's fine when you're under
I've
a
heard
tent
of
in a winery
100. And I was like, we're going to
I
be
mean,
here for a very long time.
I mean, you're there for a very long time in an in-person event too, but it's like, that's what people go to that event for. And it's the auction, like that's hard to do online. So it's like, okay, well then we need to streamline the number of auction items you have. But then again, I think you have choices of, you can sell auction items, one at a time. We're going to do lot number 1 and we sell it, and then lot number 2 and we sell it. And I know I need about 3 minutes per auction lot in that situation. Or you can do things in groups where we say, okay, here's group A, and it's going to be this trip to Hawaii and this wine barrel and, this dinner for 10, and you talk about all 3 and you close all 3 at the same time. Well, now instead of needing 3 minutes per item, I can do all 3 items in like 5 minutes because they condense down. So you just start doing the math of, what is the goal we need to raise from the auction? How many auction items do we think we need to have to meet that goal? And then how do we structure? Are they individual or in groups? And that has a huge effect on the overall flow of the program. And then, your special appeal or fund to need, that needs 7 to 10 minutes of time. So once you've figured out what those components are, then it's like, okay, well, now we've got still a half an hour, or 20 minutes or whatever that we need to fill with opening remarks. There always needs to be some housekeeping about just the sort of here's how to bid, but then is it that your executive director is speaking, or do you have program participants speaking? Are you adding an entertainment component? I'll figure out all of that stuff after I know how much time I need to spend on the fundraising.
And as far as content, what else do you add to that?
I mean, sometimes there's entertainment. I'm more and more a fan of having as much pre-recorded as possible, just because there are fewer variables to deal with in terms of internet connections and things. I like a lot of pre-recorded content. I also prefer to have people actually in the studio with me and my AV company, as opposed to being fully virtual and having remote guests, although sometimes it's a budget issue for a client, and that's fine. Like, we can totally work with that. But if it's going to be a fully virtual event, then I do want to rely more on pre-recorded content, whether that's remarks from different people in the organization, or the video that goes before the special appeal, performance videos, sponsor shout outs. I've been doing a lot of giving higher level sponsors the opportunity to include 15 to 30-second video that's less an ad for the sponsor and more of a, like, this partnership is so important to us, because we believe in what they do in the community, and all that kind of thing. It's a nice visibility thing for your sponsors, and it's also a nice palate cleanser in between sections, to have content like that. But then again, for me, most of my events, it all comes back to the fundraising portion being the primary content in the event.
As far as MCs, hosts, presenters, auctioneers, do you have any tips? What would be the best way to approach this?
I think if you're going to do a fundraising auction, you should have a fundraising auctioneer lead that portion for you. The skill set has changed because there is a latency in broadcast. So the audience is seeing everything 10, 15 seconds behind what's actually happening when the presenter is speaking. So auctioneers can't do the same sort of chant that they would do in an auction. I've got 5 looking for 6. I've got 5 looking for 6, looking for 7. Like, they can't do that. It becomes more about hyping the close of an auction a lot. But I think that some auctioneers are better than others at having adapted. For me, I have a handful of auctioneers that are doing it really well. And I would just much rather have my fundraising piece be in the hands of a professional auctioneer who is a trained public speaker and can look at the camera and stay engaged. And if something goes wrong, and sometimes things go wrong, like, they're not going to get thrown off their game. Like, they have enough of a game face to, like, keep it moving, even if something's like going off a little bit. So I love that. And then I think similar to having an MC, and some events that I've worked with have had both an MC and an auctioneer. In some cases, the auctioneer has become the MC, or the MC has become the auctioneer. So there's a little bit of flexibility, but I think it's nice if you can have 2 people. So it's not the same talking head all night long, but your MC also needs to be able to look at a camera and keep that energy up without having energy in the room to feed off of. And again, like, if something goes a little sideways, sort of keep that game face on, keep it moving. And because they're still live events, and things don't always go exactly according to plan. And so you need people that can kind of roll with that and keep a smile on their face. Actually had a client last week who did, they had a lot of pre-recorded video content, which was great, but they put together a blooper reel of all the outtakes from when they
I
were
love
pre-recording.
that.
And so then we got to the end of the event and it was, thank you so much for your support. Good night. Like, stay tuned for our bloopers. And we ran like a 2.5 minute gag reel of all the, oh, we'll take 12, take 25, take 28. And it was hilarious, and they had like the mayor, it was for a library foundation, and they had filmed the mayor of the town standing next to a 3D printer that they had at the library that they wanted to showcase they had this resource. But we had this great footage of him looking at it and saying, can I build a stadium? Can I build a new city hall? Like, what can I do with this? And it was so funny. And I thought, again, it was like, we're all human, like we're all imperfect. It was very genuine and authentic. And it was a really nice touch, I thought, to add that at the end.
I love it. That would be like, that's why I'm here right now for this, for Blur for Real.
Yeah.
I love it. Now, in terms of platforms, online auction platforms, which you've already mentioned, when it comes to live streaming, do you have any specific platforms you care to mention, or to you, it's all the same as long as the message gets out and the audience is able to receive it?
I mean, I say trust your AV company. I know that, when I teach webinars and things, I still put out there that, like, yes, there are DIY methods to host your own events, whether you want to do that on something like Zoom or StreamYard, but there are just so many variables that go into this kind of live stream production and, the internet bandwidth that you need. And I am always just much more comfortable in the hands of my AV company, whether, that's working with you, Anca, or the company that I work with a lot locally. It's like, I want to trust the professionals to do their job. Like, I don't want to dictate to somebody else who's an expert in the field, like, well, I want to use this platform. So what I've done is work with my vendor partners, that I've worked with for a long time, and said, okay, like, this is your domain. Like, this is what I want my event to be. Like, you tell me as an AV provider what format is going to be best for us to use to stream the event.
Yeah. And I think it also comes down to, the production value that you want to assign to your event. And the more events we do, the more that production value actually raises, because now there's a higher expectation of what you're going to deliver.
Yeah. And another I've been sort of dealing with lately that I think we've maybe finally solved is broadcast requires a lot more internet power than just a Zoom call. And I think that you're going to have better internet service at a business address than you are at a residential address. So that's something to take into account. And like, at the end of the day, you're still kind of at the mercy of the ISP providers, right?
Yeah.
The internet goes down, like, what are you going to do? And the company that I work with, we just had a microwave tower installed in their studio. So we can now send out a stream. The computer that sends out the stream has 2 network cards. We're sending the stream out simultaneously to the microwave tower and through the regular internet.
As
and we tested it. And we can stand back there and like unplug one or the other and get no interruption in the stream because it's just seamless. And is it more expensive to hire an AV company? Like, sure, sometimes, but it's worth it to have that kind of
insurance policy in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what's a good game plan for managing event budgets for virtual events. What are some of the necessary and not so necessary costs nowadays?
Great question. So I think the absolutely necessary costs are AV. And even if you end up doing, your own sort of DIY version through one of the software companies that are out there, you're still going to have to pay like a monthly subscription fee or something. But I think AV is a must spend. I think that you need auction software if you're doing any kind of auction or special appeal. Like, that's an absolute must spend. And then sort of the next tier down that are somewhat negotiable, but I think that I would strongly encourage you to spend money on them would be to have someone come on as a show producer, someone that's experienced with virtual events and can help you make the transition from live to virtual and like walk you through all the best practices about how to record video and understand how you design your slide decks and different things differently for broadcast than you would to be in a ballroom. And then auctioneer, I think, is something that is absolutely worth the investment to spend money on. And then after that, some of it is going to depend on the bandwidth of your organization. Some organizations have the skill set internally to be able to do all their own video production. Some people need to contract that out. Graphic design, there are still design elements that need to take place. And sometimes you have an internal graphic designer. Sometimes that needs to be hired out. If you have auction items that are large and tangible, if you've got, bottles of wine or, framed jerseys, that kind of thing, like, you might need to consider shipping costs costs for auction items unless you're able to arrange like a pickup day that people would come to your organization or some local spot and be able to pick up items. And then the stuff that goes away is all of your venue rental, your floral, your decor rental for tables and chairs and linens and all that things. A lot of your catering goes away. There is a way to still work with caterers if you want to offer the opportunity for people to purchase into a meal that gets delivered to them on event day. Like that's a partnership that you could still work out, but it would be you'd just be leveraging revenue against that cost. I mean, the catering is typically a huge line in event budgets that goes away when you're doing something virtually.
So now the flip coin of all those expenses is, you mentioned the revenue that now you have the opportunity to have. So what are some of those that you can think of right off the bat?
So the revenue sponsorships are still holding really strong. The special appeal and or fund a need, whatever you call it in your part of the country, like that's still holding really strong. Auctions are bringing in about 80% of what they would have at a live event. So definitely still working, but it has dipped a little. Although most of the events that I'm seeing, the fund a need or special appeal is doing, I mean, I've had fund a needs do as much as triple what they would have done at a live event. So that part is typically holding pretty strong. The thing I think that's changed the most is the ticket revenue. Most organizations, at least that I've worked with, have not been charging an admission fee to view the event. They're just making it public. Anyone can come view the events. Please register to bid in the auction, give to the appeal. So you lose ticket revenue, but one of the ways people are going about recouping some of that revenue is to offer, so maybe there's a VIP reception that you have to pay to participate in, and you get to be in a Zoom call with a celebrity or someone notable to that community, or a wine tasting. I had an event where you had to purchase a ticket, but then you got wine shipped to you and you were able to participate in a wine tasting. Was actually part of the main event. Like everyone got to watch the wine tasting, but you only got to actually taste the wines if you purchased it and had wine shipped to you.
Sign
I've
me
had
up.
events. I know, right? I mean, I've had events that have worked with their caterers or local restaurants to do meal delivery. I had an organization there was a VIP purchase price where you would get a meal delivered to you, and a lowered price where you could still get a meal, but you just had to go pick it up yourself. So that's something to think about. Or organizations are doing party at home packages. I've heard everything like swag bags or celebrate from home, party in a box, something like that, where again, people are purchasing in and they're getting stuff shipped to them. And I've shipped wine, I've shipped bottles of mezcal, snacks, logo wear for the organization, all good like photo props so you can take your own photos at home and then share them on social media and have, props that go with the theme. So again, that's another place where you can also be creative and think about what are the ways that we can still send people something, and that they're paying for. And so it offsets the cost of shipping. It's also a place that sponsors can provide things that you're sending out to people. So it's a sponsor benefit as well. That's a way to recoup some ticket revenue that's otherwise lost.
Absolutely. I can't stop myself from thinking that your garage turned into a warehouse at this point.
I try to always work with partners that are going to handle the shipping on their end.
Like all those bottles of wine, some get lost, on your kitchen table. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I don't know what happened to that case.
I mean, it is one benefit I have. I live so close to Napa and Sonoma that I have a lot of wine clients that frequently gift me bottles of wine. So that's a nice little perk of my job.
If nothing else, right?
Right.
I love it. Okay, so let's see. There's all these elements that if you compare a virtual gala to a in-person gala, there's certain elements that stay the same and others are just somewhat different. Do you want to touch briefly on that?
Sure. I mean, I think, I mentioned earlier, the thing to me that has changed the least is the messaging. You still need to tell your story. You still need to have that creative arc. Another thing I think hasn't changed is that, your donor base is your donor base. You know who your donors are. You know how you talk to them. All of that still remains the same. We've been seeing organizations get some new money coming in or some lapsed donors coming back, but largely you're still talking to your people. It's not this whole completely new crowd that you've never heard from. I think that the communication, you still need a strong communication plan around your virtual event. I think there are things that you need to add for a virtual event, some of the instructional kinds of things about how to register, how to bid, if it's going to be a two-screen experience, meaning you're watching it on a TV or computer, but you're bidding from a phone or a tablet, like getting that information out there. But you should still be sending your save the date and your invitation and your auction highlight emails and your final emails reminding people about the details instead of where to park, where to go to watch the event. All of that communication, I think, still stays the same. Auctions are still working. The types of auction items that are selling hasn't radically changed much. I think international travel is the thing that has been impacted the most. Domestic travel is still selling, although it's better if it can be things that are within driving distance of your organization, because people are still a little reluctant about flying. Although if you extend your expiration dates, I've sold trips all over the country and they've just had a 2-year expiration date, so people were able to travel when they feel comfortable. All of that stuff is basically the same. I think that what has changed the most is just the medium. Now we're on a screen instead of in a ballroom. And now instead of having 2.5 hours, to do the whole program, you want to keep it to 45 minutes, 45 to 60 minutes. So you just need to streamline and really prioritize, like, what are the most important elements to not only tell your story, but doing it in an engaging way.
Absolutely. And I think the timeline as well has changed just a little bit, just because now you don't have 6 to 9 months usually planning your annual fundraising gala. So my next question ties a little bit into the ticket price revenue that we touched briefly a moment earlier. And I have a question that it will mostly lean on your expertise, the experience that you've had with all the virtual events that you planned. Do you feel like by keeping that live stream open and public to anyone, do you feel like you somehow, as an organization in the same, area, zip code, whatever specific geographical location you find yourself, you are competing against the same donor database, the same donor pool of attendees? And do you see that as a concern for a nonprofit at all?
I don't. I think that because these events are virtual, they're more accessible because they often either don't have a ticket price or the ticket price is much lower. You don't have to put on the dress and drive into the venue and do all of that. And so they are more accessible. I feel like people are becoming more aware of other events in some ways, but Anca, October has always been a heavy event
Yes.
month. I'm always doing 3 or 4 events a week. Like, the volume of fundraising events hasn't changed. They're just now virtual and feel more accessible, but the
Yeah.
volume is out there. So earlier in the year, I didn't feel like anyone was charging for their events. They were just like, we just need to have it happen and it's going to be free. Or maybe it was really early. It was March, April, and they'd already charged a ticket price because they thought they were going to be in person, and they just flipped to virtual, and it was, well, just now your ticket price is a donation. But largely the events were free. And now people are starting to want to charge some kind of admission price, which I get. But I feel like what I'm seeing is on those events, when someone has already paid a ticket price just to view the events, I feel like they get to the event and they feel like, well, I already made my donation.
Right.
Like, I don't need to donate again. And I am seeing a dip on those events in the fund a need and the special appeal, where I feel like they're not bringing in as much money in that piece of the fundraising because people, someone has already paid $200 to view this event online, and they feel like, well, I did my part, I'm done. In the whole revenue model, like, I think you can still get to the average organization, I feel like, is still raising about 90% of what they would have at an in-person event. Net revenue higher because expenses are lower, but like, the how you get there looks different. And I think that is something, if you're going to charge admission for your event, I think that then you need to adjust your expectations for your auction and your appeal, because people are going to feel like they've already done their part.
Right. And making that argument, do you think that just because, the ticket price is at that point a fixed price, and then anything donation wise is a variable, do you feel that you have the opportunity for that variable to actually be higher because you've done your diligent work to tell your story well and touch your viewers in a way that maybe if your ticket price was, say, 50, 100, whatever, $200, now they actually would rather donate like $500, $1,000. So basically, do you see that being an opportunity, or is more of a, well, you rather just go down with your fixed price and, at least you can count on that?
I don't know. I think to me, it seems like it's more that people are thinking about what am I getting in exchange for my ticket price, right? The same
Mm-hmm.
way that if it was an in-person event, they would say, am I buying a table and so I know who I'm sitting with, or am I getting the ticket that gets me access into the VIP section? So events where if I have to pay a ticket price, but then I'm getting a box shipped to me that has, wine and snacks and whatever. I mean, I did a very high, like a multi-million-dollar event that the buy-in was you got to go to a restaurant. We partnered with Del Frisco's. And so there were certain Del Frisco's across the country that had in private rooms. So only like 10 people at a time in these rooms. So it was, still safe with protocols and all that. But like you got to go to the restaurant and have your dinner and you watched the event that was live streamed on a large screen in front of people, while you're there. And it was like a $1,500 ticket, but you were getting the experience of going to the restaurant and getting the wine and getting the 5-course meal and the whole deal. I think that when it comes to tickets, it's just a different mindset of like, what am I
Yeah.
getting in exchange for my ticket?
So it does
And
from like transactional
yeah.
mindset into something where I'm here to help. I'm here to actually support.
Right, right. And I feel like as more and more events or clients that I'm working with are starting to think about, well, how do we charge a ticket price? That if it's just, I've just paid this money just so that I have access to the link to view, people are doing it, but then I'm seeing them not then also give in the appeal because they feel like I already made my donation. So again, I think it's just a numbers game of when you're setting out your budget of like, okay, well, if you're going to add ticket revenue that way, like then you need to sort of take out an expectation of revenue in your appeal because people just feel like they've already donated.
Yeah, and I think with this change in mindset, then you have to keep in mind the fact that somebody's going to pay that ticket price and the expectation is for a higher value in return, like an experience or something different. Whereas if you come from the mindset of like, I'm here to support and help, that's the reason why I'm here, regardless of what you're going to deliver, although hopefully it will be good, right?
Exactly.
So let me ask you a trick question now, because it happens to everyone. Have you dealt with a difficult client in this world of virtual events? And I mean, we all work with people, and the premise is, or it should be, that we must love everyone, even the most difficult people, because in so many ways, we're just a little bit more or less difficult ourselves, right? So going back to the question, if you've recently dealt with a difficult client, what are some tips on dealing with that and best ways to handle the situation?
Yeah. Last week, actually, it was a challenging
So
week.
fresh.
I feel like one of the things that has changed is that I think that there were a lot of folks for live events that are used to, walking up to the AV desk on event day, handing off a thumb drive and saying, okay, well, here are my slides. Here's our video. And it's 2 hours before doors open. And that is not what happens in a virtual event. Like it can't, because I mean,
Yeah.
without getting into a lot of the super technical details, but like, is there encoding on the videos that isn't working? Like, you need to rehearse it. Like, you need to make sure that fonts are embedded in slide deck, the aspect ratio correct, and all those sorts of things. Like, you need different time. And so I feel like the things where client becomes difficult for me is when I set out a list of deadlines of like
Yes.
when we need to have things turned in by videos and slides and things, like not understanding why those deadlines are in place, like that there's a process, like you're going to give us
Exactly.
creative, but then there's like 5 or 6 other things that we have to do after we've gotten it before,
Yes.
we're sort of ready. And I had a client last week who was still making changes to their auction lineup, which meant also changes to the slides that went with the auction and the script and everything else. At 2:30, we went live with their show at 6 o'clock. And there was a point, like I had thought I had cut them off the night before of like, you cannot make any more changes. But I finally had to say, I was like, we are going to do everything that we can do to give you the best show that we can. But like, you are now putting the quality of your show at risk. I need you to stop.
I was just having this conversation with one of my studio directors yesterday, I think it was, where, we were just going back and forth, whining a little bit about that, how, we really set those deadlines and now the content is not there and we need to qualify it. We need to approve it. We need to build it into the show. I mean, if you're going to have overlays and graphics, that takes some time, especially if it has to be branded to your event. I'm a pretty laid back person. Yes, with a little bit of sass. That's true. But I get bossy. You know when I get bossy? When things like this happen. And that's when I'm like, okay, this is it. We need to deliver and we need to get that. And it has to happen ASAP because the focus has been on all the other things, but the event, what happens during the event? And if we can get that together, then we're in a little bit of trouble. Like you said, the value, the quality of your event is not there anymore. And honestly, I don't know if I want that on my clock.
Yep. Yeah, no, I'm the same way. Like it takes a lot to push me over the edge, but oh man, that like 2:30 in the afternoon, we go live in a couple of hours, last minute Shay, that pushed me. And again, it's like I want to give you the best product I can give you. Like I want your event to be successful and to look great and all those things. But there's that point where it's like, I need you to let me do my job. Like I need you to be done so that I can do all the things that you're asking me to do. And I think, yes, there's always difficult people out there and, in any situation, but I think that there is a lot of just lack of understanding of what the process is because virtual events are new. They take the same amount of production time as an in-person event. There's just a lot of it that I think the clients don't see because it ends up happening between myself as a show producer and my AV company. It's like our little wizard behind the curtain kind of stuff that if we're working our butts off back here to make everything happen, but like we need to have time to do it. We need to have time to do our own internal rehearsal process. I mean, the guys that I work with on event day, we run all those cues, like cue to cue to cue, like 3 or 4 times before we ever get our talent even logged in. So it's like, we've got it. We know exactly what comes next. And if you're still making changes like that late in the afternoon, then,
So with all this stress and putting so much time and work into making sure this event is successful, what are some tips when it comes to your own self-care to kind of relieve some of this pressure and the stress that's mounting up? How do you give yourself time to recharge and keep the stress at bay?
It's a great question. And it's a struggle right now just because the world is so weird right now. So I am a person that meditates every day, even if it's only 5 minutes. I try to make sure that I always do that just to kind of breathe and center. I am also a person that loves a hot bath at the end of the night with some kind of bath soak. I just recently found this great company in Canada that makes these awesome mineral baths that are very sort of soothing for me. So taking the time to do things like that. And then for me in this COVID landscape, like I'm single. So I live alone. I'll always work from home. So that didn't have to change much, but I don't have as much social interaction as I used to. And for me, my AV company is actually like my social pod. They're the only people I ever see, and we're around each other all the time. And we've kept like our little bubble pretty tight. So there are some times because I'm usually in the studio with them when we do an event, just because I like to be there and we're able to communicate with each other really easily. And a lot of times, especially after a show with a difficult client, we will sit around after we're done and we'll just have a beer together, be able to like decompress, what just happened, or talk about Star Wars or, whatever it is. But like having that kind of communal experience with my colleagues, has important part of the self-care. So I'm really grateful to them, like for our partnership and that everyone feels comfortable doing it and whatever. Because sometimes you just want, it's weird too with a virtual event that, in person, it's like you're there all day long and, then you're striking and all that. And it's like you have this wind down and the virtual events, the event is an hour and then it's over and it's 8:00 and you're like, oh, well, now what? It's kind of a weird thing. So I really enjoy those after event beers or kombuchas or water, whatever it is, just to be able to like sit around them and like decompress the event. Like that's really nice. And
absolutely. I think that's priceless. That's absolutely priceless. And I'm feeling a little jealous over here because my main team is all the way in Portland. And I'm like, man, I just wish, you guys were closer. I was close. It can be so difficult. Like even after one of those virtual events where I would be virtually producing the event from my home office, I'm like, man, it would be so nice right now to just hang and just, decompress. Like you said, so good. So yeah, now it's just me and my glass of wine.
And it's so weird, right? Like I did an event and it was an organization in Boston and we used a Boston-based AV company. Now I'm in Northern California and for me it was Sunday afternoon because it was on East Coast time and we finished the event and I ended the live stream and I just sort of sat and I thought, well, I guess I'll go to my kitchen now. It felt so sad and weird.
Right? Exactly. And I can't get out of that, mode when I'm like, I'm grateful for it, but it kind of sucks.
I mean, I don't miss having to, I mean, I do and I don't. Like some parts of me miss putting on a cocktail dress and all of that. And then another part of me is really enjoying being able to run a show like in yoga pants and,
It's true.
sneakers and a t-shirt. Like I do like that. But yeah, there's something about being able to sit around with my team right after an event again, because we've managed to keep our bubble tight.
That human interaction, I mean, it's so
So important.
important. Yeah,
Yeah, so
absolutely.
important.
So one last question before we come to a close here. In your opinion, today's event planner in the age of COVID and age of virtual events, what do you think is the most helpful topics or subjects that they're looking to learn more about or they should learn more about?
Wow. Not even sure how to answer that. I mean, I feel like online bidding it's not new. People have been doing online bidding for a long time, but like really understanding whichever software package it is that you're using, like understanding how it works, how you need to get people registered, like how you communicate. I feel like that is something where people are not spending enough time initially, like thinking through their processes. Like I'll talk to people like, well, you can have registration can go this way, like it could go route A or route B, and here are the pros and cons for each. And that can just get confusing for people. So I think that people should spend a little bit more time thinking about their auction process from the beginning and making sure that they've got the right software that's giving them the tools that they need. And they're thinking about how they're going to be leading their bidders and donors down that path.
Makes sense. Okay, Beth. Well, it was such a pleasure chatting with you. And what I want to let our audience know is ways to find you. Where can they find you online, on social media, or all the places that you hang at?
My website is Beth Sandefur Events. I am at Beth Sandefur on Instagram. I am on Twitter, but my Twitter I keep it mostly private. So Instagram is really the best place to find me. On my website, you can find more information about me. You can schedule consultations with me. And then I'm also on LinkedIn.
Fabulous. You have a webinar coming up. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a great place for people to continue their virtual event education, really, because I mean, that's the reason for this podcast in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, so I am actually a marketing partner for Greater Giving, which is online auction software. I became a client of theirs back in 2008 and then a marketing partner since 2012. Do a lot of event night support for their clients. So I've been doing this series basically every other Tuesday since May. Is designed for their clients, but you don't have to be a Greater Giving client to attend. It's not a sales pitch. It's not a training. It's Tuesdays at 2, virtual event Q&A. So I will do 15-ish minutes of presentation on just here are the emerging best practices and trends and, what we're seeing come out of the virtual event world. And then I just kind of open it up to like an Ask Me Anything style Zoom. And so if you are a Greater Giving client and want to ask Greater Giving questions, if you're not and just want to ask about virtual event topics that relate specifically to your organization. I think there's a lot of great webinar content out there. I know Swing Strategies has done stuff. You, Anca, like you've done a lot of stuff. Like there's a lot of stuff out there. I mean, it's just a Zoom meeting. It's super informal. Come with your questions. Like, let's just have a conversation about what's happening for virtual events. And I'm not a hard sales kind of girl. If you want to contact me afterwards and talk about how I can help you produce your event, like great. But for me, this is just, I like teaching and educating. And I feel like there are a lot of just questions and things out there. And so I like to give the opportunity of like, ask me anything. We'll see what we can come up with, in this session.
Absolutely. And I love that. Honestly, I feel like one of the good things coming out of this pandemic is the fact that the lines and the borderlines between people have blurred out and everybody has been way more open to collaborate and to share and to just help each other out. Because at this point, it's not so much me doing my thing and you doing your thing. Is like, how can we put together our knowledge, our expertise and help each other out and help our clients out? Because that's the most important thing at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much again. And it's been a great time that I had with you on here. And I'm super excited that we got to do this with our crazy schedules.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I've loved working with you and I hope we get to do so again in the future.
Okay, friends, this is it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you so much for listening and for hanging with us. If you found any of this information helpful, please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite listening platform. Maybe take a screenshot of the podcast, share it on social media, and tag us at @Trifan_events. To find more information about Trifan events, our services, what our clients have to say about us, as well as tips and tricks of the trade, especially on how to transition to virtual or hybrid events, we would love for you to join us at trifanevents.com, and that is TREEFANEVENTS.com. I welcome your feedback and suggestions via direct messaging on Instagram and Facebook, or email at podcast@trifanevents.com. Here's to safety and health and being happy and staying warm, because hey, winter is here.